Good evening, Heavy D Storytelling, and I am your host, David Sneathen, and I'm going to tell you a story. Hi, as I get to read, I get to tell you a story, our little guy. Okay, now I'm getting a lot of text messages. So, ooh, Rebecca had a picture. Oh, that's like one. How much is that one?
180, but it's been on for more than a week. It's
Oh,
really
gosh.
chunky. I think we can put it down.
Okay. Yeah, start. I said, hey, I'm gonna start, and then, yeah. Oh, it's Foxy! Yay, nice, Foxy! I wish that you could add photo comments to the live stream,
So pretty.
but you can't. But you can add photo. You can add your own posts to my page, and that is fine. Am I still alive? Yes. Okay, there I am. Hi. Here's JJ. He saw your Foxy. Oh, look at that. Okay. So, hello, Rebecca. We're so glad to have you tonight. Okay, so today is the 29th of April, and as always, we're going to begin with our daily proverb, which is actually a whole chapter's worth of proverbs, not just one. So this is from Proverbs chapter 29 from the English Standard Version of the Bible. He who is often reproved yet stiffens his neck will suddenly be broken beyond healing. When the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan. He who loves wisdom makes his father glad, but a companion of prostitutes squanders his wealth. By justice, a king builds up the land, but he who exacts gifts tears it down. We are having a fire. Just a minute. Let us. No, not a real fire.
What? Oh my gosh.
Oh.
You're freaking me out.
Bread making mistake. Yay. Daniel, come on back. I bet that's what I was smelling earlier. Oh no. I hope that doesn't mean that Daniel. Hi Daniel, I'm waiting for you. Waiting for Daniel, waiting for Daniel. Hi Daniel, how are you doing? You want to read Proverbs 29 for us?
I'm freaked out.
All right, how about we start over? Proverbs chapter 29. He who is often reproved yet stiffens his neck will suddenly be broken beyond healing. When the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan. He who loves wisdom makes his father glad, but a companion of prostitutes squanders his wealth. By justice, a king builds up the land, but he who exacts gifts tears it down. A man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet. An evil man is ensnared in his transgression, but a righteous man sings and rejoices. A righteous man knows the rights of the poor. A wicked man does not understand such knowledge. Scoffers set a city aflame, but the wise turn away wrath. If a wise man has an argument with a fool, the fool only rages and laughs, and there is no quiet. Bloodthirsty men hate one who is blameless, and seek the life of the upright. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. If a ruler listens to falsehood, all his officials will be wicked. The poor man and the oppressor meet together. The Lord gives light to the eyes of both. If a king faithfully judges the poor, his throne will be established forever. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. When the wicked increase, transgression increases, but the righteous will look upon their downfall. Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart. Where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint, but blessed is he who keeps the law. By mere words a servant is not disciplined, for though he understands, he will not respond. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. Whoever pampers his servant from childhood will in the end find him his heir. A man of wrath stirs up strife, and one given to anger causes much transgression. One's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor. The partner of a thief hates his own life. He hears the curse but discloses nothing. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. Many seek the face of a ruler, but it is from the Lord that a man gets justice. An unjust man is an abomination to the righteous, but one whose way is straight is an abomination to the wicked. That is Proverbs chapter 29 from the English Standard Version of the Holy Scriptures. At this time, I'm going to call upon Kimberly, who is standing by, waiting to give us a synopsis of what happened in the first two chapters of The Horse and His Boy. And you also drew a picture today, too, that you wanted to share?
Actually, yes.
Yep. Okay. So she's going to be back in just a minute, and then she's going to show us a picture of something that may have happened in chapter 1 or 2. This is lying around right now. In chapter 2, it was running very fast.
Great pun. Okay, so in the first few chapters, what was Shasta? He finds out that his so-called dad is about to sell him into slavery, and it's still glitching.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah. Okay, so his so-called dad, who isn't actually his dad, is going to sell him into slavery, and he goes over to his soon-to-be master's horse and is like, I wonder if this guy's a good guy or a bad guy. And the horse is like, he's bad. And then they're like, oh my gosh, you can talk. And then he's like, hey, you want to run away together? And then the other guy's like, yeah, let's do it. So they start running away, and they make a few plans. They go north because that's A, the direction Narnia is in, B, the opposite direction of where his master will think his horse is gone because he thinks his horse is a dumb, non-Narnian horse who's just going to go back to his stable. And also, so they start going, and then they hear a lion. So they start running, like galloping as fast as possible. And thank goodness that Bree taught. Bree's the horse. Technically, that's not his real name. It's just a really hard name to pronounce, and so called him Bree. And yeah, thank goodness Bree taught. I keep forgetting names. Sorry. Wait, I think I might. Yeah, I forgot it.
Artemis?
No, I keep forgetting the boy's name.
Shasta.
Yeah, Shasta. Okay. So thank goodness he taught Shasta how to ride properly because he would have fallen down off the horse and became food for a lion. Okay? And the lions were chasing them. There were two. And there was another rider also. And there was a cloud. And when it blew over the moon and the moon was shining again, um, uh, Shasta, he saw another rider, and he had heard the rider earlier and the horse. And after they got across,
And that was a song.
no, it was a girl in a uniform. But anyway, after they crossed a river or something, um, well, this one stole her uniform from her brother, I believe. That's at least um, what the guess was. Okay, so then the girl's horse started talking, and Bree was like, "Oh my gosh, you're a talking horse!" And the other horse was like, "Oh, you too! Yay!" And then they decided after a long fight to go together to Narnia. And that's about where we are, right?
Yeah, and this is about to tell
First story.
everybody her story. So now here's your. This, by the way, is not a sketchbook. So Kimberly obviously needs a sketchbook. All right, chapter 3. Yeah, I thought you had one, but I don't know. But if she's drawing in her composition book,
I have this one, but it's too small.
oh, she has this one. It's not too small.
It's too small to do something like this.
You could do that in this. Okay, so she has a sketchbook. She just doesn't like it. All right, so chapter 3, at the gates of Tashban. And I'm hoping that we get to read 3 chapters today, so we'll see how that goes. All right, yay. At the gates of Tashban. My name, said the girl at once, is Aravis Tarkina, and I am the only daughter of Kidrash Tarkan, the son of Rishti Tarkan, the son of Kidrash Tarkan, the son of Ilsombrech Tisroch, the son of Ardib Tisroch, who was descended in the right line from the god Tash. My father is the lord of the province of Kalavar, is one who has the right of standing on his feet in his shoes before the face of Tisroch himself, may he live forever. My mother, on whom be the peace of the gods, is dead, and my father has married another wife. One of my brothers has fallen in battle against the rebels in the far west, and the other is a child. Now it came to pass that my father's wife, my stepmother, hated me, and the sun appeared dark in her eyes as long as I lived in my father's house. And so she persuaded my father to promise me in marriage to Ahoshta Tarkan. Now this Ahoshta is of base birth, though in these latter years he has won the favor of the Tisroch, may he live forever, by flattery and evil counsels, and is now made a Tarkan and the lord of many cities, and is likely to be chosen as the Grand Vizier when the present Grand Vizier dies. Moreover, he is at least 60 years old and has a hump on his back, and his face resembles that of an ape. Nevertheless, my father, because of the wealth and power of this Ahoshta, and being persuaded by his wife, sent messengers offering me in marriage, and the offer was favorably accepted, and Ahoshta sent word that he would marry me this very year at the time of high summer. When this news was brought to me, the sun appeared dark in my eyes, and I laid myself on my bed and wept for a day. But on the second day I rose up and washed my face and caused my mare Hwin to be saddled, and took with me a sharp dagger which my brother had carried in the Western wars and rode out alone. And when my father's house was out of sight, and I was come to a green open place in a certain wood where there were no dwellings of men, I dismounted from Hwin, my mare, and took out the dagger. Then I parted my clothes where I thought the readiest way lay to my heart, and prayed to all the gods that as soon as I was dead, I might find myself with my brother. After that, I shut my eyes and my teeth and prepared to drive the dagger into my heart. But before I had done so, this mare spoke with the voice of one of the daughters of men and said, "Oh, my mistress, do not by any means destroy yourself, for if you live, you may yet have good fortune, but all the dead are dead alike." I didn't say it half so well as that, muttered the mare. "Hush, ma'am, hush," said Bree, who was thoroughly enjoying the story. "She's telling it in the grand Calormene manner, and no storyteller in Tisrock's court could do it better. Pray on, Tarquina." That's Bree. I'm sorry, I don't know how much of the voices I have today. "When I heard the language of men uttered by my mare," continued Aravis, "I said to myself, the fear of death has disordered my reason and subjected me to delusions, and I became full of shame, for none of my lineage ought to fear death more than the biting of a gnat. Therefore I addressed myself a second time to the stabbing, but Hwin came near me and put her head in between me and the dagger, and discoursed for me most excellent reasons, and rebuked me as a mother rebukes her daughter. And now my wonder was so great that I forgot about killing myself and about Ahosha, and said, 'Oh, my mare, how have you learned to speak like one of the daughters of men?' And Hwin told me what is known to all this company, that in Narnia there are beasts that talk, and how she herself was stolen from thence when she was a little foal. She told me also of the woods and the waters of Narnia, and the castles and the great ships, till I said, 'In the name of Tash and Azeroth and Zardina, Lady of the Night, I have a great wish to be in that country of Narnia.'" "Oh, my mistress," answered the mare, "if you were in Narnia, you would be happy, for in that land no maiden is forced to marry against her will." And when we had talked together for a great time, hope returned to me, and I rejoiced that I had not killed myself. Moreover, it was agreed between Hwin and me that we should steal ourselves away together, and we planned it in this fashion. We returned to my father's house, and I put on my gayest clothes and sang and danced before my father, and pretended to be delighted with the marriage which he had prepared for me. Also I said to him, "O my father, and O the delight of my eyes, give me your license and permission to go with one of my maidens alone for 3 days into the woods to do secret sacrifices to Zardina, Lady of the Night and of maidens, as is proper and customary for damsels when they must bid farewell to the service of Zardina and prepare themselves for marriage." And he answered, "O my daughter, and O the delight of my eyes, so it shall be." But when I came out from the presence of my father, I went immediately to the oldest of his slaves, his secretary, who had dandled me on his knees when I was a baby, and loved me more than the air and the light, and I swore him to be secret, and begged him to write a certain letter for me. And he wept and implored me to change my resolution, but in the end he said, "To hear is to obey," and did all my will. And I sealed the letter and hid it in my bosom. "But what was in the letter?" asked Shasta. "Be quiet, youngster," said Bree. "You're spoiling the story. She'll tell us all about the letter in the right place. Go on, Tarquina." Then I called the maid who was to go with me to the woods and perform the rites of Zardina, and told her to wake me very early in the morning. And I became merry with her and gave her wine to drink, but I had mixed such things in her cup that I knew she must sleep for a night and a day. As soon as the household of my father had committed themselves to sleep, I arose and put on an armor of my brother's, which I always kept in my chamber in his memory. I put into my girdle all the money I had and certain choice jewels, and provided myself also with food, and saddled the mare with my own hands, and rode away in the second watch of the night. I directed my course not to the woods where my father supposed I would go, but north and east Ashban. Now for 3 days and more I knew that my father would not seek me, being deceived by the words I had said to him. And on the fourth day we arrived at the city of Azimbalda. Now Azimbalda stands at the meeting of many roads, and from it the post of the Tisroc, may he live forever, ride on swift horses to every part of the empire, and it is one of the rights and privileges of the greater Tarkans to send messages by them. I therefore went to the chief of the messengers in the house of imperial posts in Azimbalda and said, O dispatcher of messages, here is a letter from my uncle Ahushta Tarkan to Kidresh Tarkan, lord of the Calabar. Now take these 5 crescents and cause it to be sent to him. And the chief of the messengers said, to hear is to obey. This letter was feigned to be written by Ahoshta, and this was the signification of the writing. Ahoshta Tarkan, Kidras Tarkan, salutation and peace. In the name of Tash, the irresistible, the inexorable, be it known to you that I made the journey toward your house to perform the contract of marriage between me and your daughter Aravis Tarkina. It pleased fortune and the gods that I fell in with her in the forest when she had ended the rites of sacrifice to Zardina according to the customs of maidens. And when I learned who she was, being delighted with her beauty and discretion, I became inflamed with love, and it appeared to me that the sun would be dark to me if I did not marry her at once. Accordingly, I prepared the necessary sacrifices and married your daughter the same hour that I met her, and have returned with her to my own house. And we both pray and charge you to come hither as speedily as you may, that we may be delighted with your face and speech, and also that you may bring with you the dowry of my wife, which by reason of my great charges and expenses I require without delay. And because thou and I are brothers, I assure myself that you will not be angered by the haste of my marriage, which is wholly occasioned by the great love I bear for your daughter. And I commit you to the care of all the gods. As soon as I had done this, I rode on in all haste from Azimbalda, fearing no pursuit, and expecting that my father, having received such a letter, would send messages to Ahushta or go to him himself, and that before the matter was discovered, I should be beyond Tarshban. And that is the pith of my story until this very night, when I was chased by lions and met you at the swimming of the salt water. And what happened to the girl, the one you drugged? Asked Shasta. Doubtless she was beaten for sleeping late, said Aravis coolly, but she was a tool and a spy of my stepmother's. I am very glad they should beat her. I say, that was hardly fair, said Shasta. I did not do any of these things for the sake of pleasing you, said Aravis. And there's another thing I don't understand about your story, said Shasta. You're not grown up. I don't believe you're any older than I am. I don't believe you're as old. How could you be getting married at your age? Aravis said nothing, but Bree said at once, Shasta, don't display your ignorance. They're always married at that age in the great Tarkan families. Shasta turned very red, though it was hardly light enough for the others to see this, and felt snubbed. Aravis asked Bree for his story. Bree told it, and Shasta thought that he put in a great deal more than he needed about the falls and the bad riding. Bree obviously thought it very funny, but Aravis did not laugh. When Bree had finished, they all went to sleep. Next day, all 4 of them, 2 horses and 2 humans, continued their journey together. Shasta thought it had been much pleasanter when he and Bree were on their own, for now it was Bree and Aravis who did nearly all the talking. Bree had lived a long time in Calormen and had always been among the Tarkans and Tarkans' horses, and so, of course, he knew a great many of the same people and places that Aravis knew. She would always be saying things like, "But if you were at flight of Zulindra, you would have seen my cousin Alamash." And Bree would answer, "Oh yes, Alamash. He was only captain of the chariots, and you know, I don't quite hold with chariots or the kind of horses who draw chariots. That's not real cavalry, but he was a worthy nobleman. He filled my nose bag with sugar after the taking of Tebeth." Or else Bree would say, "I was down at the lake of Mesril that summer," and Aravis would say, "Oh, Mesril, I had a friend there, Lazareline Tarquina. What a delightful place it is, those gardens and the Valley of 1,000 Perfumes." Bree was not in the least trying to leave Shasta out of things, though Shasta sometimes nearly thought he was. People who know a lot of the same things can hardly help talking about them, and if you're there, you can hardly help feeling that you're out of it. Quinn, the mare, was rather shy before a great war horse like Bree and said very little, and Aravis never spoke to Shasta at all if she could help it. Soon, however, they had more important things to think of. They were getting near Tashbaan. There were more and larger villages and more people on the roads. They now did nearly all their traveling by night and hid as best as they could during the day, and at every halt they argued and argued about what they were to do when they reached Tashbaan. Everyone had been putting off this difficulty, but now it could be put off no longer. During these discussions, Aravis became a very little, less unfriendly to Shasta. One usually gets on better with people when one is making plans than when one is talking about nothing in particular. Bree said the first thing now to do was to fix a place where they would all promise to meet on the far side of Tashbaan, even if, by any ill luck, they got separated in passing the city. He said the best place would be the tombs of the ancient kings on the very edge of the desert. Things like that, things like great stone beehives, he said. You can't possibly miss them. And the best of it is that none of the Calamines will go near them because they think the place is haunted by ghouls and are afraid of it. Aravis asked if it wasn't really haunted by ghouls, but Bree said he was a free Narnian horse and didn't believe in these Calamine tales. And then Shasta said he wasn't a Calamine either and didn't care a straw about these old stories of ghouls. That wasn't quite true, but it rather impressed Aravis, though at the moment it annoyed her too, and of course she said she didn't mind any number of ghouls either. So it was settled that the tombs should be their assembly place on the other side of Tashbaan, and everyone felt they were getting on very well till Hwin humbly pointed out that the real problem was not where they should go when they had got through Tashbaan, but how they were going to get through it. "We'll settle that tomorrow, ma'am," said Bree. "Time for a little sleep now." But it wasn't easy to settle. Aravis' first suggestion was that they should swim across the river below the city during the night and not go into Tashbaan at all. But Bree had two reasons against this. One was that the river mouth was very wide and it would be far too long a swim for Hwin to do, especially with a rider on her back. He thought it would be too long for himself too, but he said much less about that. The other was that it would be full of shipping, and of course anyone on the deck of a ship who saw two horses swimming past would be almost certain to be inquisitive. Shasta thought they should go up the river above Tashbaan and cross it where it was narrower, but Bree explained that there were gardens and pleasure houses on both banks of the river for miles, and that there would be Tarkans and Tarkinas living in them and riding about the roads and having water parties in the river. In fact, it would be the most likely place in the world for meeting someone who recognizes Aravis or even himself. "We'll have to have a disguise," said Shasta. Hwin said it looked to her as if the safest thing was to go right through the city itself, from gate to gate, because one was less likely to be noticed in the crowd. But she approved of the idea of disguise as well. She said, "Both the humans will have to dress in rags and look like peasants or slaves, and all Aravis armor and our saddlebags and things must be made into bundles and put on our backs, and the children must pretend to drive us, and people will think we're only pack horses." "My dear Hwin," said Aravis rather scornfully, "as if anyone could mistake Bree for anything but a war horse, however you disguised him." "I should think not indeed," said Bree, snorting and letting his ears go ever so little back. "I know it's not a very good plan," said Hwin, "but I think it's our only chance. And we haven't been groomed for ages, and we're not looking quite ourselves. At least I'm sure I'm not. I do think if we get well plastered with mud and go along with our heads down as if we're tired and lazy, and don't lift our hoofs hardly at all, we might not be noticed. And our tails ought to be cut shorter, not neatly, you know, but all ragged." "My dear madam," said Bree, "have you pictured to yourself how very disagreeable it would be to arrive in Narnia in that condition?" "Well," said Hwin humbly, she was a very sensitive mare, "the main thing is to get there." Though nobody much liked it, it was Hwin's plan which had to be adopted in the end. It was a troublesome one and involved a certain amount of what Shasta called stealing and Bree called raiding. One farm lost a few sacks that evening and another lost a coil of rope the next, but some tattered old boys' clothes for Aravis to wear had to be fairly bought and paid for in the village. Shasta returned with them in triumph just as evening was closing in. The others were waiting for him among the trees at the foot of a low range of wooded hills which lay right across their path. Everyone was feeling excited because this was the last hill. When they reached the ridge at the top, they would be looking down on Tash Ban. "I do wish we were safely past it," muttered Shasta to Hwin. "Oh, I do," said Hwin fervently. That night they wound their way through the woods up to the ridge by the woodcutter's track, and when they came out of the woods at the top, they could see thousands of lights in the valley down below them. Shasta had no notion of what a great city would be like, and it frightened him. They had their supper, and the children got some sleep, but the horses woke them very early in the morning. The stars were still out, and the grass was terribly cold and wet, but daybreak was just beginning far to the right across the sea. Aravis went a few steps away into the wood and came back looking odd in her new ragged clothes and carrying her real ones in a bundle. These, and her armor and shield and scimitar, and the 2 saddles and the rest of the horse's fine furnishings were put into the sacks. Bree and Hwin had already got themselves as dirty and bedraggled as they could, and it remained to shorten their tails. As the only tool for doing this was Aravis' scimitar, one of the packs had to be undone again in order to get it out. It was a longish job and rather hurt the horses. "My word," said Bree, "if I wasn't a talking horse, what a lovely kick in the face I could give you. I thought you were going to cut it, not pull it out. That's what it feels like." But in spite of the semi-darkness and cold fingers, all was done in the end. The big packs bound on the horses, the rope halters, which they were now wearing instead of bridles and reins, in the children's hands, and the journey began. "Remember," said Bree, "keep together if we possibly can. If not, meet at the tombs of the ancient kings, and whoever gets there first must wait for the others." "And remember," said Shasta, "don't you 2 horses forget yourselves and start talking, whatever happens." Chapter 4, Shasta Falls In with the Narnians. At first Shasta could see nothing in the valley below him but a sea of mist with a few domes and pinnacles rising from it. But as the light increased and the mist cleared away, he saw more and more. A broad river divided itself into 2 streams, and on the island between them stood the city of Tash Ban, one of the wonders of the world. round the very edge of the island so that the water lapped against the stone ran high walls strengthened with so many towers that he soon gave up trying to count them. Inside the walls, the island rose in a hill, and every bit of that hill up to the Tisrock's palace and the great temple of Tash at the top was completely covered with buildings, terrace above terrace, street above street, zigzag roads or huge flights of steps bordered with orange trees and lemon trees, roof gardens, balconies, deep archways, pillared colonnades, spires, battlements, minarets, and pinnacles. And when at last the sun rose out of the sea and the great silver-plated dome of the temple flashed back its light, he was almost dazzled. I'm going to show you a picture now of Tash Ban, one of the wonders of the world. It's not the Narnian world. This isn't Narnia. This is, what is it, Calormen or one of those other countries. It's the same world that Narnia is in, yes, just as this is the same world that England is in. Okay. Get on, Shasta, Bree kept saying. The riverbanks on either side of the valley were such a mass of gardens that they looked at first like a forest until you got closer and saw the white walls of innumerable houses peeping out from beneath the trees. Excuse me. Soon after that, Shasta noticed a delicious smell of flowers and fruit. About 15 minutes later, they were down among them, plodding on a level road with white walls on each side and trees bending over the walls. I say, said Shasta in an odd voice, in an odd, not odd, odd, like full of awe, voice. This is a wonderful place. Maybe with a real British accent, that wouldn't sound like odd, but it would sound like odd. But I don't know how to make it sound different. I dare say, said Bree, but I wish we were safely through it and out at the other side, Narnia and the north. At that moment, a low throbbing noise began, which gradually swelled louder and louder till the whole valley seemed to be swaying with it. It was a musical noise, but so strong and solemn as to be a little frightening. That's the horns blowing for the city gates to be open, said Bree. We shall be there in a minute. Now, Aravis, do droop your shoulders a bit and step heavier and try to look less like a princess. Try to imagine you've been kicked and cuffed and called names all your life. If it comes to that, said Aravis, what about you drooping your head a bit more and arching your neck a bit less and trying to look less like a war horse? Hush, said Bree, here we are. And they were. They had come to the river's edge, and the road ahead of them ran along a many-arched bridge. The water danced brightly in the early sunlight. Away to the right, nearer the river's mouth, they caught a glimpse of the ship's masts. Several other travelers were before them on the bridge, mostly peasants driving laden donkeys and mules or carrying baskets on their heads. The children and horses joined the crowd. Is anything wrong? Whispered Shasta to Aravis, who had an odd look on her face. Oh, it's all very well for you, whispered Aravis rather savagely. What would you care about Tash Ban? But I ought to be riding in a litter with soldiers before me and slaves behind, and perhaps going to a feast in the Tisrock's palace, may he live forever, not sneaking in like this. It's different for you. Shasta thought all this very silly. At the far end of the bridge, the walls of the city towered high above them, and the brazen gate stood open in the gateway, which was really wide but looked narrow because it was so very high. Half a dozen soldiers leaning on their spears stood on each side. Aravis couldn't help thinking, they'd all jump to attention and salute me if they knew whose daughter I am. But the others were only thinking of how they'd get through and hoping the soldiers would not ask any questions. Fortunately, they did not. But one of them picked a carrot out of a peasant's basket and threw it at Shasta with a rough laugh, saying, Hey, horse boy, You'll catch it if your master finds you've been using this saddle horse for pack work. Ha ha! This frightened him badly, for of course it showed that no one who knew anything about horses would mistake Bree for anything but a charger. It's my master's orders, so there, said Shasta, but it would have been better if he had held his tongue, for the soldier gave him a box at the side of his face that nearly knocked him down, and said, Take that, you young filth, to teach you how to talk to a free man. But they all slunk into the city without being stopped. Shasta cried only a very little. He was used to hard knocks. Inside the gates, Tashbaan did not at first seem so splendid as it had looked from a distance. The first street was narrow, and there were hardly any windows in the walls on each side. It was much more crowded than Shasta had expected, crowded partly by the peasants on their way to market, who had come in with them, but also with water sellers, sweetmeat sellers, porters, soldiers, beggars, ragged children, hens, stray dogs, and barefooted slaves. What you would chiefly have noticed if you had been there was the smells which came from unwashed people, unwashed dogs, scent, garlic, onions, and the piles of refuse which lay everywhere. Shasta was pretending to lead, but it was really Bree who knew the way and kept guiding him by little nudges with his nose. They soon turned to the left and began going up a steep hill. It was much fresher and pleasanter, for the road was bordered by trees and there were houses only on the right side. On the other, they looked out over the roofs of houses in the lower town and could see some way up the river. Then they went round a hairpin bend to their right and continued rising. They were zigzagging up to the center of Tashbaan. Soon they came to finer streets. Great statues of the gods and heroes of Calormen, who are mostly impressive rather than agreeable to look at, rose on shining pedestals. Palm trees and pillared arcades cast shadows over the burning pavements, and through the arched gateways of many a palace, Shasta caught sight of green branches, cool fountains, and smooth lawns. It must be nice inside, he thought. At every turn, Shasta hoped they were getting out of the crowd, but they never did. This made their progress very slow, and every now and then they had to stop altogether. This usually happened because a loud voice shouted out, Way, way, way for the Tarkan, or for the Tarkina, or for the 15th Vizier, or for the ambassador. And everyone in the crowd would crush back against the walls. And above their heads, Shasta would sometimes see the great lord or lady for whom all the fuss was being made, lolling up upon a litter with 4 or even 6 gigantic slaves carried on their bare shoulders. For in Tashbaan there is only one traffic regulation, which is that everyone who is less important has to get out of the way for everyone who is more important, unless you want a cut from a whip or punch from the butt end of a spear. It was in a splendid street very near the top of the city. The Tisrock's palace was the only thing above it, that the most disastrous of these stoppages occurred. Way, 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 said the voice. Way for the white barbarian king, the guest of the Tisrock, may he live forever. Way for the Narnian lords. Shasta tried to get out of the way and make Bree go back. No horse, not even a talking horse from Narnia, backs easily. And a woman with a very edgy basket in her hands, who was just behind Shasta, pushed the basket hard against his shoulders and said, Now then, who are you shoving? And then someone else jostled him from the side, and in the confusion of the moment, he lost hold of Bree. And then the whole crowd behind him became so stiffened and packed tight that he couldn't move at all. So he found himself unintentionally in the first row and had a fine sight of the party that was coming down the street. It was quite unlike any other party they had seen that day. The crier who went before it shouted, Way, way, was the only Calormen in it. And there was no litter. Everyone was on foot. There were about a half a dozen men, and Shasta had never seen anyone like them before. For one thing, they were all as fair-skinned as himself, and most of them had fair hair. And they were not dressed like men of Calormen. Most of them had legs bare to the knee. Their tunics were of fine, bright, hearty colors, woodland green or gay yellow or fresh blue. Instead of turbans, they wore steel or silver caps, some of them set with jewels, and one with little wings on each side. A few were bareheaded. The sword at their sides were long and straight, not curved like Calormene's scimitars, and instead of being grave and mysterious like most Calormenes, they walked with a swing and let their arms and shoulders go free, and chatted and laughed. One was whistling. You could see that they were ready to be friends with anyone who was friendly, and didn't give a fig for anyone who wasn't. Shasta thought he had never seen anything so lovely in his life, but there was not time to enjoy it, for at once a really dreadful thing happened. The leader of the fair-headed men suddenly pointed at Shasta, cried out, "There he is! There's our runaway!" and seized him by the shoulder. Next moment he gave Shasta a smack, not a cruel one to make you cry, but a sharp one to let you know you are in disgrace, and added, shaking, "Shame on you, my lord! Fie for shame! Fie for shame! Queen Susan's eyes are red with weeping because of you. What? Truant for a whole night? Where have you been?" Shasta would have darted under Bree's body and tried to make himself scarce in the crowd if he had had the least, but the fair-headed men were all round him by now, and he was held firm. Of course, his first impulse was to say that he was only poor Arshish, the fisherman's son, and that the foreign lord must have mistaken him for someone else. But then, the very last thing he wanted to do in that crowded place was to start explaining who he was and what he was doing. If he started on that, he would soon be asked where he had got his horse from and who Aravis was, and then goodbye to any chance of getting through Tashbaan. His next impulse was to look at Bree for help, but Bree had no intention of letting all the crowd know that he could talk, and stood looking just as stupid as a horse can. As for Aravis, Shasta did not even dare to look at her for fear of drawing attention, and there was no time to think, for the leader of the Narnians said at once, "Take one of his little lordship's hands, Peridin, of your courtesy, and I'll take the other. And now on, our royal sister's minds will be greatly eased when she sees our young scapegrace safe in our lodging." And so, before they were halfway through Tashbaan, all their plans were ruined, and without even a chance to say goodbye to the others, Shasta found himself being marched off among strangers and quite unable to guess what might be going to happen next. The Narnian king, for Shasta began to see by the way the rest spoke to him that he must be a king, kept on asking him questions, where he had been, how he got out, what had been done with his clothes, and didn't he know that he had been very naughty? Only the king called it naught instead of naughty. And Shasta said nothing in answer because he couldn't think of anything to say that would not be dangerous. "What, all mum?" asked the king. "I must plainly tell you, prince, that this hangdog Silence becomes one of your blood even less than the scape itself. To run away might pass for a boy's frolic with some spirit, but the king's son of Archenland should avouch his deed, not hang his head like the Calormene slave." This was very unpleasant, for Shasta felt all the time that this young king was the very nicest kind of grown-up and would have liked to make a good impression on him. The strangers led him, held tightly by both hands, along a narrow street and down a flight of shallow stairs, and then up another to a wide doorway in a white wall with two tall, dark cypress trees, one on each side of it. Once through the arch, Shasta found himself in a courtyard, which was also a garden. A marble basin of clear water in the center was kept continually rippling by the fountain that fell into it. Orange trees grew round it out of the smooth grass, and the 4 white walls which surrounded the lawn were covered with climbing roses. The noise and dust and crowding of the streets seemed suddenly far away. He was less rapidly across the garden and then into a dark he was led rapidly sorry he was led rapidly across the garden and then into a dark doorway. The crier remained outside. After that, they took him along the corridor where the stone floor felt beautifully cool to his hot feet and up some stairs. A moment later, he found himself blinking in the light of a big, airy room with wide open windows, all looking north so that no sun came in. There was a carpet on the floor, more wonderfully colored than anything he had ever seen, and his feet sank down into it as if he were treading in thick moss. All round the walls there were low sofas with rich cushions on them, and the room seemed to be full of people, very queer people, some of them, thought Shasta. But he had no time to think of that before the most beautiful lady he had ever seen rose from her place and threw her arms around him and kissed him, saying, "Oh, Corin, Corin, how could you? And thou and I are such close friends ever since thy mother died. And what should I have said to thy royal father if I came home without thee? Would have been a cause almost of war between Archenland and Narnia, which are friends time out of mind. It was not, playmate, very not of thee to use us so." Apparently, thought Shasta to himself, I'm being mistaken for a prince of Archenland, wherever that is, and these must be Narnians. I wonder where the real Corin is. But these thoughts did not help him say anything out loud. "Where has been Corin?" said the lady, her hand still on Shasta's shoulders. I don't know," stammered Shasta. "There it is, Susan," said the king. "I could get no tale out of him, true or false." "Your Majesties, Queen Susan, King Edmund," said a voice, and when Shasta turned to look at the speaker, he nearly jumped out of his skin with surprise, for this was one of those queer people whom he had noticed out of the corner of his eye when he first came into the room. He was about the same height as Shasta himself. From the waist upward he was like a man, but his legs were hairy like a goat's and shaped like a goat's, and he had goat's hoofs and a tail. His skin was rather red, and he had curly hair and short pointed beard and two little horns. He was, in fact, a faun, which is a creature Shasta had never seen a picture of or even heard of. And if you've read a book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you may like to know that this was the very same faun, Tumnus by name, whom Queen Susan's sister Lucy had met on the very first day when she found her way into Narnia. But he was a good deal older now, for by this time Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy had been kings and queens of Narnia for several years. "Your Majesties," he was saying, "His little Highness has had a touch of the sun. Look at him, he is dazed. He does not know where he is." Then, of course, everyone stopped scolding Shasta and asking him questions, and he was made much of and laid on a sofa, and cushions were put under his head, and he was given iced sherbet in a golden cup to drink and told to keep very quiet. Nothing like this had ever happened to Shasta in his life before. He had never even imagined lying on anything so comfortable as that sofa or drinking anything so delicious as that sherbet. He was still wondering what had happened to the others and how on earth he was going to escape and meet them at the tombs, and what would happen when the real Corin turned up again. But none of these worries seemed so pressing now that he was comfortable, and perhaps later on there would be nice things to eat. Meanwhile, the people in that cool, airy room were very interesting. Besides the faun, there were two dwarfs, a kind of creature he had never seen before, and a very large raven. The rest were all humans, grown-ups, but young, and all of them, both men and women, had nicer faces and voices than most Calormenes. And soon Shasta found himself taking an interest in the conversation. "Now, madam," the king was saying to Queen Susan, the lady who had kissed Shasta, "what think you? We have been in this city fully 3 weeks. Have you yet settled in your mind whether you will marry this dark-faced lover of yours, this Prince Rabadash, or no?" The lady shook her head. No, brother, she said, not for all the jewels in Tashbaan. Hello, thought Shasta, although they're king and queen, they're brother and sister, not married to one another. Truly, sister, said the king, I should have loved you the less if you had taken him, and I tell you that at the first coming of the Tisroc's ambassadors into Narnia to treat of this marriage, and later when the prince was our guest at Cair Paravel, it was a wonder to me that ever you could find it in your heart to show him so much favor. That is my folly, Edmund, said Queen Susan, of which I cry you mercy. Yet when he was with us in Narnia, truly this prince bore himself in another fashion than he does now in Tashbaan. For I take you all to witness what marvelous feats he did in that great tournament and Hasselude which our brother the High King made for him, and how meekly and courteously he consorted with us the 7 days. But here in his own city he has shown another face. Ah, croaked the raven, it's an old saying, see the bear in his own den before you judge his conditions. That's very true, Shallowpad, said one of the dwarfs, and another is, come live with me and you'll know me. Yes, said the king, we have now seen him for what he is. That is a most proud, bloody, luxurious, cruel, and self-pleasing tyrant. Then, in the name of Aslan, said Susan, let us leave Tashbaan this very day. There's a rub, sister, said Edmund, for now I must open to you all that has been growing in my mind these last 2 days and more. Peredan, of your courtesy, look to the door and see that there is no spy among us. All well? So, for now we must be secret. Everyone had begun to look very serious. Queen Susan jumped up and ran to her brother. Oh, Edmund, she cried, what is it? There's something dreadful in your face. And chapter 5 is called Prince Corin. And let's see, the first word is mine. See how long we commit to it. I think we can do it. It's about 15 pages. Let's see if JJ's awake. Daniel? JJ's asleep. Daniel, can you hear me with the door closed? Oh, you're doing the trains. JJ's asleep. So I think we're gonna continue the story tomorrow since JJ's asleep. I don't want him to get too far behind. But here we are. Chapter 6 is tomorrow. 5 and 6 is tomorrow. So maybe 7, we'll see. Hopefully we get 3 chapters in. And I hope you enjoyed our story adventure this evening, The Horse and His Boy by C.S. Lewis. And we will continue tomorrow. And God bless you. Have a good night. And may the Tisroc not live forever.